we recognize when we have a vision or build a strategy that we see future worth doing, it's worth fighting for, it's worth working towards, it's worth taking risks.
Welcome to Connecting Business. I'm your host, Christina Munoz. Today, I'm joined by Cecily Sommers, a business futurist that Google, Salesforce, Purina, and JP Morgan Chase have all turned to for guidance on making sense of the future. Cecily, we're so excited to have you with us today. How are you doing?
I'm great. It's wonderful to be with you, Christina. Thanks for the opportunity to have this conversation.
Well, we truly thank you for taking the time to talk with us today as we tackle the conversation about what every business wants to know. What is the future and how do we get there? So I know we have a lot to get to today. So let's jump right in. First things first, when we hear the term futurist, we might have visions of crystal balls or wild predictions or tarot cards, but tell us a little bit about what you do and exactly what is a futurist.
Yes, well, thank you for asking for that clarification because futurists can be used in a number of contexts. I am a business futurist. And what that means is that I practice strategic foresight, which is a very kind of analytical approach to understanding the forces of change and how they're shaping society and business. So it helps us see the landscape and what kind of choices that we might make when we're casting ourselves into a set of potentials. As futurists, we talk about the potentials the future may hold. We don't make predictions. I like to say that the future is predictable, but its outcomes are not. And what I mean by that is that there is a way for understanding how change works that really gives us a stable, secure, and smart way to investigate what potentials are there for us to consider.
Wow, I really want to wrap our brains kind of around this because it might be new to you, it might be unheard of to you, or you might be unfamiliar with this. So give some examples, if you could, of what kind of things this would look like for you as a business futurist. Kind of what does that mean that you do day to day? What do you look at? What are those tangibles?
Well, it's often focused on a very specific business problem or opportunity to solve for. We're taking a look at how far out do we want to go? What are the needs of your audience, your customer base, whatever it may be? What's your purpose as an organization in meeting those needs? And when we have that piece of the formula, this is actually a formula I use called solving for X. We then, once we have the needs clear, our purpose clear, we can then say, let's take a look at what the forces of change are doing so that we can imagine how we might meet the needs of our customers in X number of years through the lens of our purpose. And then it gives us, it's not anything and everything in the future. It's actually going to give us a very specific way to focus. What are the implications for our geography, for our industry, our domain? And then we can narrow it down from there and begin to shape scenarios to plan that we can investigate, try things on, prototype, and ultimately come with a really smart and sober strategic plan that feeds innovation and ultimately change management and leadership.
Wow, I love the way you talk about it all with regard to being strategic, not just these random things that could happen, but being very strategic with it. So you've been doing this for more than 20 years. I'm curious to know your story. How did you get to where you are today? How did you become a business futurist?
Well, I can tell you it was not anything that I considered when I was young. What do you want to be when you grow up? The answer to that question when I was, that age was I want to be a dancer. And
I love it.
And I did. I started studying ballet at the age of 5 and pursued that training quite seriously and I had a professional career as a dancer. And first in ballet and then in contemporary dance. And so I got an early start because all of that happens at early ages. Somewhere along the line, I also began to teach anatomy. I had to, when I did go to college after dancing with the Omaha Ballet for a couple of years, I had to take physiology and anatomy as a part of that curriculum requirement. I got my bachelor's of fine arts in dance. And big surprise to myself was that it clicked for me. And I was invited to teach anatomy while I was still completing my degree, and then continued to do that through dance kinesiology and other opportunities in the first years. That teaching then informed me when I made a choice to leave dance as a career, but not a passion. As I was trying to solve, how is it that I support my interests? I'm interested in more than just dancing. I'm interested in supporting myself in a more secure way. I'm interested in having more freedom than I can have in this lifestyle. And I made the choice to become a chiropractor. And so I had to begin and go back and take all of the, frankly, high school level courses in chemistry and algebra that I hadn't had in order to ultimately earn my way to the prerequisites for chiropractic school. Taught anatomy through that time, biochemistry got to be one of my skills in teaching. So I was on my way, and it was a time of starting over, something that I know quite a lot about. And as a chiropractor, I did start a business, built a beautiful clinic, bought another, had been teaching anatomy, clinical sciences all throughout, and then business classes. So when I sold my clinic, it was because I had gotten a reputation for the success I had had in business and for the kind of branding that I did. I had made the discovery that I really found business to be the most creative platform that I knew, brought my sensibility as an artist towards that. That was very important, as well as my understanding of systems and diagnosis. So I moved on to do brand strategy consulting, which includes understanding, as far as I'm concerned, who you are, which my training in the arts really serves very beautifully, and also where are you going? How are you going to stay relevant, which is really the only thing we are ever seeking to do, not just in business, but in life. It's evolution's primary mandate is that we retain our relevancy. And to do that, we have to understand what's happening out in the world so that the value we have inside of us resonates with others, and that we find our audience and they go, yeah, me too. I'm you, you're me. We belong together. And so that was the work that I started. The trend work expanded. I started something called the Push Institute, a look at what's pushing the future in new directions, as I also developed my foresight skills and practice, became a member of the Association for Professional Futurists, wrote a book, and really developed methods and tools in foresight that have been made a big contribution. So I have been fortunate to forge my own path and know the hard work that takes, starting over several times, but mostly by listening to what is it that's calling to me from the inside. So to kind of complete that little story, what I do as a futurist is I help organizations and leaders identify the signals of change in the environment. What I do as I coach and consult with leaders directly is to help us identify the signals of change inside. And our job is always to match what's changing on the inside with what's needed on the outside, and to find those moments of relevance and resonance. And that's kind of the stem to stern type of work that I do now in strategy, innovation, and leadership.
Wow. Well, I absolutely love your story because coincidentally, I started out in the ballet world as well and almost moved to Ballet Omaha when I was 16. I decided not to, but it was that serious for me. So I'm very familiar with your background. And my first professional gig was actually Chanhassen Dinner Theater outside of Minneapolis, where you are. And so I love the similarities, and I truly understand that. Fine arts and learning so much about how we move and how we function. And that's really, I teach ballet to this day still, and we really teach about body awareness, self awareness. And I really love how that's pulling into what you're saying. So, these signals of change, tell me a little bit more about that when it comes to internal as well as external. What would be some signals of change that businesses can look for?
On the inside, should we start there first?
Sure. Yes.
Yeah. Most of the time we get nudged from the inside. If we get nudged by frustration, boredom, judgment, resentment, longing, all kinds of things that tell us what we're doing currently is maybe expiring. For me, dance helped me for a very, very long time. And what I began to rub up against was some unhappiness. And I had to investigate what's going on here. At that time, I had to ask myself a couple of questions. Is this situational? Is it about changing from the company I was in, which was, a full-time position? I was doing very well. Or is it conditional? And I really, in asking myself that question, recognized that it was conditional. That when I am doing best, I'm kind of following my own mind, and that has continued to be a very kind of key characteristic of what makes me happy. And that there is some freedom to explore things and create from that place. So I would say that's frequently when we're getting crabby or crusty around the edges, it's because the form that we are currently in is expiring. And we are seeking, like the content that's evolving in us is seeking new form. And that is what evolution often looks like. And so it asks us to start again and think about, who am I now? What matters now? What are the conditions of my, not just happiness, but when we're doing well, it's when we're contributing the most. It's when we're being stretched and learning and so forth. So I find that we often have an attitude that when we're not all the way feeling great, that something's wrong with us. And I really counsel people to say, no, this is your wisdom speaking. There's great information for you. Lean into what's getting crabby here and turn to it and go, what are you trying to tell me? What needs need to be cared for? Let's investigate and pay attention so that you can start to shape, your next set of choices. And that's a whole different path. But those would be the crispiness, I would say, that starts to show up is really telling us there's something new here that needs to be seen and cared for. And we turn to that. So those are the internal signs in a generic way.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good. And I love that because I literally am one of those people that I get a stomach ache when something's just not quite right. And I have to go, what is this? What's causing it? And think through everything that you just said. But I love the conditional versus situational to really analyze what's going on there, because it can really help you figure out if it's situational, you got to do this. If it's conditional, you got to do this. So that's really good advice there. What about those external signals of change? What should a business be looking for with regard to that?
For us to be able to really scan and watch and identify emerging signals of change, I look to the 4 forces of change. And this is a really important model in which I understand how society changes, always has, always will. So those 4 forces, when it really take an economic look of what happens when people come together to work together and form a group of any size, the things that you are evaluating are, what resources do we have to work with? So generally speaking, that means our natural resources, the gifts of nature that allow life to be made and that will sustain our own. So plants, animals, earth, agriculture, energy, all the rest of it. Every society really depends on those natural resources to sustain itself. We then take a look at the force field of technology. And technology is our tools are what allow us to first harvest those natural resources and then make really cool stuff from it. We make secondary products, everything from shelter to means of developing food to doing things like developing rockets that take us into space and investigate the next frontier of resources like Mars or asteroids for energy. So technology really expands our capability beyond the natural resource world and is also an instrument of our imagination. The third force field that we look now kind of going in succession is demographics. We're looking at who's a part of our group because we need to really make sure that it's robust and diverse for us to sustain our strength. What is the distribution of gender, of procreation, of skill, of labor force, a number of other things that make us strong and sustainable over time. So demographics has a really big influence on how things are going to play out over the next 10 to 20 years, for instance. And then finally, the last force field that we study is governance. Because when people come together to do more than they can together than they might achieve on their own, what they're doing is cooperating. And so that's something that humans do exceptionally well. We're able to cooperate at scale. And the way that we do that is through rules. We do that through rules of law, rules of the market, and also things like just social and moral codes and mores that keep us contained and cohered together, where there's a sense of belonging. And also direction so that we can move together towards a common goal and future. Those are broad and generic and always useful. So where do we look for signals of change? We look in each one of those force fields. What's happening with regard to resources? Big forces right now and drivers are climate change, as we know, COP26, where we have I think a real win with this year's group is that for the first time, people are saying, yeah, it's happening. This is real. So there's some consensus around that in a way that has not moved before. But we can see the trends, we can see the new technologies, we can see the social movements arising from that force field. Watch the fringes for what's coming next. Technology is similar. We see exponential technologies such as artificial intelligence, biotechnology and genetic engineering. The blockchain is a huge disruption to our current economic model. Demographics, there's a reason why all these current issues come up from these four forces. What has been happening as we get more people on the planet, but also distribution of labor has attention to it. We are arguing about immigration. So all these trends and current issues have their roots in these four forces. And governance, nobody here needs to look very far to understand how frothy that is. Governance, which is the human domain, is usually lagging behind the first three as we kind of sort out who are we together as we tackle these issues. What is the role very often of our rules, policy, regulation? And we argue about the role as well as anything else. So we look in each of these force fields to see what are the emerging trends, issues that are pushing us in new directions. And then we will also, from those four forces, begin to narrow them according to what your domain and specific interests are. But I'm always looking across those four forces. They tell me where change is coming from and where it's likely to go.
Such great advice for all of us to just be aware. I think so often, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? People are freaking out about it. And yet you just gave some really good, solid places for you to turn, look, analyze, and learn a little bit about those four forces. I think there'd be a lot to learn from that if people would just take the time to maybe educate themselves on those four forces in their world. So I know that the not knowing part is always seems to be the scariest, whether it's business or motherhood or relationships in general. So how can you help us think a little bit more like a futurist with regard to the not knowing?
Yeah, this may be the most important capacity that any of us needs to attend to, care for, and cultivate in ourselves, which is really to be able to stare into the face of uncertainty and keep moving anyway. And so how do you do that is really the question.
Yes.
And that is more important now than it has been before. Earlier in my career as a futurist, I was able to make forecasts that were, very often 10 years out or so. That was kind of the arc of maturity for a lot of trends. And now that's not possible. We're undergoing such kind of structural change that the only trend that is secure is one of real turbulence.
Hmm.
We are in a time of reordering. About once a long generation, 70 to 80 years ago, the world reorders itself. Sometimes it does so through wars, but kind of the global powers reorder how things are going, how economies work. And we're in such a time now. And some historians refer to it as kind of a revolution to golden age cycle. So the thing to keep in mind as a matter of perspective is we're at the front end of that. And that the next 10 years or so, it's kind of this turbulence is where we are. So finding stability on the inside is going to be more critical because stability on the outside is not available. Change is going to keep coming. It will feel traumatic sometimes, and there are other times when we just take the long view and keep ourselves steady as we go. So here's how we do that.
Okay.
There are 4 habits of mind that can become really daily practices in all we do that give us some of that stability which we seek. And they are, again, kind of in an order. They begin with, we can be optimistic about a future. The future is not a thing. It's not known. It is only unknown. It is something we conceive of, and then we move ourselves in that direction. It is, at its core, a faith-based venture. We recognize when we have a vision or build a strategy that we see a future worth doing, it's worth fighting for, it's worth working towards, it's worth taking risks. So we have faith in that vision. We also invest ourselves in faith that we're the ones to do it. It's our vision. And then ultimately, we have to have faith in the process to teach us as we go. We don't know those outcomes. As I said, the future is somewhat predictable when we follow those 4 forces. Its outcomes are not. And so they will be our kind of probing and editing as we go. We take stock in that through our optimism. And what I mean by optimism is really a mindset that says, I can and I will see and make good in anything. It really invests itself in our learning capability. And it also recognizes that there's a neurobiology about smiling, or about an optimistic mind, which actually opens up the channels and our neurons and the associations that occur through our brains to be more creative. Because what the future and what uncertainty really need from us is to keep exercising creative choices. And optimism is the very first thing to keep us open in the face of uncertainty. The next habit of mind is curiosity. So when we meet things that are unfamiliar, it's absolutely natural for us to go, ew, I don't like it. I don't like the idea of artificial intelligence being able to track everything that I do. That makes me uneasy about the future. I don't like the use of stem cells in research. That makes me uneasy. Sometimes it's that I don't like the idea that we're going to be able to print 3D food in our kitchens or have culture our own meat or whatever it may be, genetically
Right.
modify, right?
Hmm.
We do like being healthy, though. We do like longer lives. We do like being able to have alternatives to our energy sources and also sustainable agricultural, all of which those technologies can give us. So when we find ourselves in our bodies going, ew, and the signals upstairs are a little bit like, I don't like it. It's not right. I'm judging it. I can't buy in. We're recoiling from it. This is kind of a disgust, and it's visceral and it's natural. We can make a choice when we're in that posture to say, okay, remember, be curious. Let me actually shift my posture and lean forward and say, ooh, tell me more. How can I learn about this technology? How can I learn about this future? How can I learn about this person, this issue, whatever it may be? Because when we understand more, we actually begin to see more possibility. It doesn't feel threatening. And very often we begin to have the confidence and even the excitement about what's there. So an open mind with optimism, a posture of, ooh, tell me more, and commit to learning when we feel stuck and brittle. Make that be your shift.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah. It's, it's kind of like I consider these habits of mind like a Swiss Army knife that can, anytime we're stuck, we can pull it out. Optimism. Have a smile. Remember, it's worth learning about. I will be a bigger and better person for it. Let me exercise my curiosity, which leads us to the third habit of mind, which is courage. And courage, I have come to respect and care about as it's not a brazen act. It's not something that some people have and others don't. We all have it. And it's kind of like, what the Cowardly Lion learned from the Wizard of Oz. It already lives in you, and it lives in your heart. And it is the capacity to companion your fear and to turn towards yourself and others when buts, very often fear shows up. It's like, but that doesn't work, or but we've done that before, or, but I don't like it. But courage comes in a kind of softness of, I see you, fear. We're okay. We're going to be okay. If we remind ourselves back to that optimistic mindset, I will and can make good and see good in anything. Let's go. And you can try it on in small ways throughout your day. It's the courage to do something that's uncomfortable, and we do it all day long, and then pat yourself on the back. Grow the muscle that recognizes yourself as courageous, that recognizes your sincerity of intention, and lean into it a little bit more. So optimism, curiosity, courage, and the last habit of mind, and these are habits to cultivate, is patience.
Gotta have a lot of that.
Change in ourselves, in the world, is a long-acting phenomenon. And it's a complex set of phenomena. And we need to let it reveal itself to us. We want to be there for that emerging change that comes from the inside, as we've talked about, that emerging change that is becoming known and understood in the environment. And through the course of testing things, staying creative and curious, and trusting that learning process, patience is really important. We don't want to grasp too hard of like, it's not working yet, it's going wrong, right? There will be choices to make, and sometimes hard choices to make as you go. But for myself, I have learned to really recognize that when things aren't clear about, is it good, is it bad, is it working, is it not, there are a couple of things that I rely on. One is that clear is clear. When clarity is present, it is really abundantly clear. You know it. And I wait for that. And I often will resist taking action before clarity comes. And that does mean I have to sustain my anxiety. You can't, sometimes we're trying to act because we don't like the feeling of the anxiety. But patience, taking the long view, and knowing that directionally you're right, even if you don't know how it's going to turn out. And allow it to teach you, inform you as you go. When we take on change of any kind, and in particularly transformational change of any kind, whether it's the projects we're doing or the circumstances we're facing in our own lives, we have to allow ourselves to be shaped by it. Allow ourselves to be changed by the change that's in the midst, rather than trying to stay the same and control it. It never works. You'll be in an argument with reality and you won't win. That's the bottom line. You will not win on that one. So it is a long ride, and it is a place of equanimity, ultimately, that I think comes from thinking like a futurist. We're smart. We know how to study change. We know where to find the signals of change. We know how to work with it when it's calling to us. We can think things through to make the right plan and cast the right direction. And then we have some tools about how we find stability within ourselves so that we can stay present for the change that is working upon us and is working upon the world right now as well, so that we can stay connected. Stay connected as people, stay connected again for the relevance that the world needs from us, our best contribution, and to stay connected with one another. So optimism, curiosity, courage, and patience.
Such great advice. I feel like we could all replay the recording of you talking about those 4 habits every morning when we wake up to set ourselves up straight for the day. And I think this world would be a much better place if we all could commit to those 4 habits. So thank you for that insight and wisdom so very much. I want to remind everybody that there are more resources from all of the stuff that Cecily's talking about as bonus content on the blogs. If you want to dig and want to know more about it, you can always go there. But before we go today, Cecily, I just want to know your final thoughts when it comes to emergencies, unexpected, embracing change. What's your final advice for all of us to move forward and do all of those things eloquently?
Well, when you are in a crisis mode, you are in a crisis mode. So first of all, allow for that to be the case. Crisis is about triage. You are seeking to remain safe, to secure your assets, whatever that may be for an organization or in your own life. Get busy doing the right thing around securing safety first. We then move, and by the way, it's not, this is not linear. Crises, these events it's all circular. So we're needing to develop ways of managing crisis as it hits. Then we move into testing some hypotheses and updating. This is what we've done through COVID. We update our strategies, not, once a year, but like once every 9 weeks or so. And really we're testing the environment and coming back frequently. As we move into from those tests, we're now beginning to bet a little bit longer, and that's that faith in the future piece where we're starting to make some bets on the future. So that piece of facing uncertainty, you don't know how it's going to go, knowing what's right to do when there are no right answers, is that little bit of the longer piece of the horizon where you're going to invest in that. Stay close to your 4 habits of mind and test the signals of change as you go so that you can edit and iterate and evolve. Stay the course of your purpose, Make sure that you're pointing towards the needs that are those are the people that you are caring for. It's what your life is about, what your organization is about. Stay steady on that, but iterate and update as you go. Wisdom is not a thing like courage that some people have and some people don't. It is my hope, it is my commitment that really when we learn to think like a futurist, we're making wiser choices. Wise choices are available for all of us. And wise choices include novel choices. We lead with creativity. It is about bringing something into the world that doesn't quite exist yet, but we know that in its effort that we're doing the right thing by investigating it, that it is out of service that we do that. And we have to then enact it with creative choices, which again, we've not been here to, creativity precedes uncertainty. Uncertainty precedes creativity. They go together. And to be able, as I said at the very beginning, stare into the face of uncertainty and using these tools, keep moving anyway.
That is some fantastic final thoughts. Move forward anyway, even when staring at the face of uncertainty. Well, Cecily Sommers, I want to thank you so much for your time and just sharing your wisdom and your insight with all of us. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Thanks so much.
And I want to thank you for joining us today for Connecting Business. This series is brought to you by Kinetic Business. Be sure to check out all the episodes at kineticbusiness.com/connectingbusiness. Did you love the episode? Do you have a topic or guest idea? Email us at connectingbusiness@windstream.com. We look forward to sharing more stories with you. Until next time, stay connected.